up so that it'll really hold its own when I put it over the pasta. The next thing that I'm going to put in the soup is sun-dried tomatoes. Now, I've already chopped these. The sun-dried tomatoes are just bursting with flavor because they do taste like tomato, but there's a certain tanginess. There's just a little something different that the sun does to it when it works on it. So I like to put it in things that I want to have a very good heart to it. So these robust little cubes are going to go into the pot with everything else, and they're going to start loosening up and dropping out some of that zest, some of that flavor. Now we're going to go to yet another heart. This is artichoke heart. Now, artichokes are a very, very interesting vegetable. Artichokes are really thistles. A thistle, like you see a dandelion plant or maybe one of those big spiky plants in the south, like where I grew up, we had these huge thistles everywhere you went, and there were thorns all over the place. And they were very cellulose, the stalks of them. It was kind of like a big stalk of celery. And on the top, it would make this gorgeous pink flower, and it would have these little spiky fronds all over the place, and it would bloom, then it would shrink back, and then it would open up again, and all of these little things would go flying all over the place with these tendrils, and so they would catch the wind, and they would just glide along. Well, that's exactly what artichokes are. Only you pick them before they open back up and start spitting stuff everywhere. And that way the center of them is very, very tender. These are artichoke hearts that I purchased. They are marinated. I showed you the jar earlier. They've got all different types of spices and some olive oil, and that's going to be wonderful as well in this soup. With the palm hearts and the roasted red peppers, I actually used the juices from them as well. All of the juice that was in the jar of roasted red peppers, I incorporated when I was blending it, as well as all the juice from one can of palm hearts and from one jar of artichoke hearts. That juice is right here, and I'm going to go ahead and pour that in along with our chopped artichoke hearts. You want to chop those up about 2 half-inch cubes. The same with the roasted red peppers, the same with your onion, and the same with your palm heart. And this is the puree, because I had, just like the 2 cans of palm hearts, I had 2 jars of artichoke hearts. I had one to chop up and one to go ahead and puree and use to make the base for our soup. Pour this guy in here. And take our big spoon, now that we're done using it for the pasta, and stir all this together. It's already looking wonderful. Now we're going to spice this with quite a few things. We're going to put all sorts of stuff in this soup. I want a very, very robust, heavy flavored, hearty soup to complement our also very heavily flavored eggplant, and then the nice light pallid flavor of the pasta with the mango in it. So we're going to use some sage. This is rubbed sage. I use all different types of spices, and they come in both fresh and dry forms. Now, the fresh form of sage, it looks kind of like a tongue, almost. It's very bumpy, and it has kind of a rounded edge, but then they'll take that and they'll rub it down, and so you separate the stems from the leaves itself, and that's how you get rubbed sage, and we have that here. We're going to add some of that to our soup, not all of it. Then we have some sliced up garlic. I like lots of garlic in things. This is actually a very large clove of garlic. You can put more if you want. You don't have to put as much, but especially in things that have an Italian spin, which, as you can probably tell, most of our dishes have a type of Italian theme, kind of an origin from Italy. I like to add lots of garlic to things like that. Then, of course, we're going to put a little bit of salt. A little extra. That's going to be quite nice in there. Give it a good creaminess. Some cracked black pepper. This is pretty finely cracked, actually. I usually like to get a mill and some good-sized peppercorns. Peppercorns are going to add a lot of flavor, but also every now and then it will give you a sudden spark, a sudden bite that you weren't quite expecting, and it adds just a little bit more music to your dish. So we're going to go ahead and put that in there. This is rosemary. This is dried rosemary. Many times on the show before I've used fresh rosemary. Most of these things I'm putting in here today, aside from the basil, are dried. And the reason for that is I just wanted to give it a little bit finer of a look because if you put lots of fresh herbs in there, unless you sit there and finely chop them, it's going to have very broad pieces. But I wanted the base to this to have a nice smooth consistency with just different little flecks of the different herbs. This is thyme. Now, thyme is a wonderful plant to grow. It's going to make a small little bush about this high, and then when it flowers, it'll actually have these beautiful little white flowers on it. So the thyme itself is not only a good herb to use in your cooking, but it's also quite beautiful on your windowsill. And I find that thyme smells a little bit like Listerine. Some people think I'm crazy for saying that, but I really do. Although it complements most dishes very, very well.
Sorry.
I'm going to go ahead and get this stirred. And all this incorporated. Smell, if you guys can smell this, it smells like an Italian market coming out of this soup right here. That is wonderful. And of course we have just a little bit of parsley. Parsley isn't too heavy of a flavor unless you use a lot of it. I like parsley and things. It gives a good look, as you can see. Even when it's dry, it's got a very, very vibrant green color. And that's going to add a wonderful color palette to things as well. Because all the other herbs, you probably notice, are a little bit brown. So when you have something like that going on, you want to mix up the look of things a little bit. And with the red peppers, the parsley, the bright green of the dried parsley is going to complement very, very well. Lastly, and certainly not least, we have some oregano. Oregano is one of the primary spices used in Italian cooking, and I'm going to add it to this dish to give it a very, very robust flavor. I'm going to go ahead and put that in here. You're going to want to let this marinate for a while. You're really going to want to let it work itself out, get mixed, and blend. So we're going to let that happen. And it's looking great, smelling great already. It feels like I'm back in New Orleans. There are a couple of little Italian stores in the French market. The French market, but they're Italian stores. But there are a couple of Italian stores there. You go inside, there's these huge bins of different types of lentils and beans and olives. And then the smell, you walk in and it's like a wall of scent hitting you. So we've got all that going in there. So let's get into our word a little bit. In the book of Psalms, there is one that is very important, Psalm number 19. It says, "Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer." The Bible has many different verses about the heart, about our hearts. It says, in fact, that David was a man after God's own heart. Jesus says you must forgive from your heart. It's always talking about the heart of